the winner is Eminem, the Eminem Show.
Wait, he didn't just spell the word rapper and leave out a P, did he? Yep.
You really hate Sean Combs.
Why would they be thinking that?
Because of the things that you post on Instagram,
Yeah,
because
this,
of the...
Look at this. And let's stop for a second and do say that I hated him enough to hire his kids. And we've never done anything to each other. So it's just competitive energy and things that you say about other artists while you're in.
I ain't never made a call to Diddy. I got Diddy's number. Just hit him up. Yo, Diddy, what?
Most people think this story is about leaked footage. It is. Some think it's about a documentary. It's bigger than that. Because when 50 Cent hinted that certain footage might surface, people weren't watching for entertainment. They were watching for confirmation. Confirmation of suspicions that had been floating for years. And when T.D. Jake's name began circulating near Diddy's controversy, the tone shifted instantly. This stopped being celebrity rivalry. It became a collision between fame and faith, power and morality, influence and perception. And when those worlds overlap, the damage isn't measured in headlines. It's measured in trust. But here's the question no one slows down to ask. What was actually shown? Was there real footage? Or was it something more strategic, a suggestion powerful enough to do the damage without revealing anything at all? Because this situation isn't just about exposure. It's about silence. And silence, when pressure rises, is rarely accidental. Think about this carefully. If credible footage existed linking powerful names to controversial environments, would we see public outrage first? Or controlled quiet? Would allies rush to defend? Or would they wait? Drop your answer in the comments. Do you think evidence drives the narrative, or does power shape it? And if you want breakdowns that go deeper than surface headlines where we analyze perception, influence, and strategy, subscribe now. This isn't a gossip story. It's a power story. Now let's focus. 50 Cent and Diddy have had tension for years. Public jokes, subtle warnings, competitive energy disguised as humor. But when a documentary entered the picture, especially during active controversy, the energy changed. Because documentaries don't just comment. They frame, and framing controls interpretation. When word spread that unseen material might be referenced, attention spiked instantly. Not because people saw anything, because they feared something might exist. That distinction matters. Around the same time, names started appearing in broader discussions tied to lawsuits and investigations. Some were central, others were peripheral. T.D. Jake's name surfaced not as a defendant in criminal court, but as part of a larger conversation. And in public perception, nuance moves slowly. Association moves fast. Being named is not being charged. Being connected is not being guilty. But perception doesn't separate those things cleanly. Especially when religion is involved. Especially when influence is involved. Especially when someone's authority is built on moral guidance. The whisper was, did he commit something? The whisper was simpler. Why was he anywhere near this? Why is his name even being mentioned? That shift is powerful. When celebrities go quiet during controversy, it's strategic. When faith leaders go quiet, it feels heavier. Because they don't just manage brands. They manage belief. And belief reacts differently. Reports of high-profile gatherings. Claims of exclusive events. Allegations, not confirmations, of private environments where power operated differently. None of it legally proven in public courtrooms. But enough conversation to create smoke. And smoke changes optics. When federal investigations escalate around a central figure, the spotlight widens. It doesn't stay fixed. It scans outward. Associates, collaborators, frequent attendees, public supporters. That's how networks are examined. Not through dramatic announcements, through mapping connections. Now imagine being anywhere inside that network, even loosely, even socially, even professionally. You don't have to be guilty to feel exposed. Because context can be stripped, moments can be reframed, and once something is labeled controversial, proximity alone becomes risky. This is why the idea of leaked footage became so explosive. Not because the public saw anything, but because they imagined what could be on it. Fear is a stronger driver than facts. Fear of exposure, fear of misinterpretation, fear of reputational collapse. So when 50 Cent suggested his project would reveal more layers, the internet didn't ask for legal confirmation. It anticipated escalation. And escalation in modern media doesn't always mean proof. It means pressure. Let's be honest. 50 Cent understands pressure. He understands timing. He understands that you don't need a direct accusation to trigger reaction. You only need to position a question where it hurts. And questions can destabilize faster than accusations. Because accusations can be denied. Questions linger. So the volatility here isn't rooted in confirmed evidence. It's rooted in implication. And implication, amplified through digital culture, can reshape perception overnight. There have been claims again, claims that certain environments tied to Diddy were more than just social events. That influence flowed differently there. That alliances were built privately. That recordings may have existed. Nothing publicly verified in full detail. But when even unconfirmed claims overlap with moral leadership figures, tension builds fast. And tension fuels audience attention. So instead of asking whether someone was ruined, ask this. Did a spotlight shift? Did the narrative widen? Because exposure doesn't have to prove wrongdoing to create damage. It only needs to introduce doubt. And doubt, once planted publicly, grows on its own. The spotlight doesn't destroy reputations by itself. It forces them to stand still while the public analyzes every shadow. And that's where this becomes dangerous. Not in what was shown, but in what was suggested. And once suggestion enters the conversation, the story stops being about facts alone. It becomes about perception management. Now think about how this unfolded publicly. A powerful entertainment figure faces escalating legal and investigative scrutiny. Headlines intensify. Language sharpens. Suddenly, everyone connected even loosely evaluates their distance from the center. That's instinct. And that's when older associations get reinterpreted. Photos once ignored now feel loaded. Appearances once casual feel strategic. Donations feel transactional. Silence feels defensive. The public doesn't wait for courtroom pacing. It reacts in real time. So when people say he was ruined, what they often mean is this. The framing changed. And once framing changes, every future action is viewed through it. And that shift is almost impossible to reverse. Once framing changes, neutrality disappears. Every move becomes symbolic. Every word becomes measured. And every pause becomes analyzed. That's the environment T.D. Jakes' name entered. Not a courtroom. An atmosphere. And atmospheres are harder to fight than accusations. Because you can respond to an allegation. But how do you respond to a narrative that never directly accuses, yet constantly suggests? This is where documentary strategy becomes powerful. A documentary doesn't have to present new evidence to shift perception. It only has to reorganize what already exists. Public photos, shared stages, event appearances, financial ties, social proximity. Individually, none of these mean wrongdoing. But arranged carefully without neutral context, they can feel deliberate, intentional, coordinated. And once something feels coordinated, the audience starts filling in motive. That's how implication works. Now layer in the idea of recordings. Alleged devices, recovered storage, federal seizures. Whether publicly confirmed in detail or not, once the phrase recorded rooms enters the conversation, imagination takes over. People don't picture hallway cameras. They picture private conversations, closed doors, moments never meant to be public. And that mental image alone raises stakes. Because if recordings exist, context disappears. A clip can be extracted. A frame can be isolated. A moment can be reinterpreted. Even something harmless can look damaging when stripped of its surroundings. That possibility creates tension. And tension creates behavioral shifts. Suddenly statements become cautious. Appearances become selective. Public messaging becomes tighter. Not necessarily because of guilt, but because of risk. Risk management in high-profile environments is ruthless. If your name is anywhere near controversy, you prepare. Not for prosecution, for perception, and perception doesn't follow legal standards. It follows narrative momentum. Now consider the psychological side. When a celebrity is linked to controversy, the audience shrugs. When a faith leader is linked even loosely, the reaction intensifies. Because spiritual authority carries expectation. Expectation of discernment. Expectation of moral distance. Expectation of separation from environments perceived as corrupt. So even if no crime is alleged directly, the question becomes sharper. Why was proximity allowed? That question alone is heavy. And heavy questions linger longer than headlines. Now zoom out. Federal investigations don't just focus on one name. They expand outward. Mapping communication. Mapping travel. Mapping relationships. That doesn't mean everyone mapped is guilty. But it does mean everyone mapped becomes visible. And visibility during controversy is uncomfortable. Because once the spotlight widens, the internet starts connecting dots. And online culture doesn't wait for confirmation. It builds patterns. Pattern recognition is powerful even when it's flawed. If people see the same names appear near multiple controversial headlines, they assume correlation. And correlation in public discourse quickly becomes implication. That's how reputations get tested. Not through verdicts, through repeated association. Now think about the escalation ladder quietly forming. First, public tension between rivals. Second, legal pressure around a central figure. Third, allegations of private environments. Fourth, speculation about recordings. Fifth, peripheral names appearing in broader filings. Sixth, a documentary promising deeper layers. Each step increases stakes. None of them require confirmed footage. Because the promise of revelation is enough. The audience doesn't need proof immediately. They need anticipation. And anticipation keeps people watching. Now here's where nuance matters. Being named in broader legal context does not equal criminal charge. But digital culture compresses nuance. It prefers clear heroes and villains. It prefers dramatic arcs. So when someone known for moral authority appears anywhere near scandal, the contrast fuels engagement. Public image versus private proximity. Faith versus fame. Sermons versus speculation. That contrast is compelling. It creates tension without direct accusation. And tension sustains narrative. Now consider another possibility. If footage truly existed capable of damaging multiple influential figures, would it be released recklessly? Or handled carefully? Information at high levels is leverage. Leverage isn't always detonated publicly. Sometimes it's suggested. Sometimes it's hinted. And the hint alone reshapes behavior. Because fear of exposure changes alliances faster than exposure itself. People become careful. Statements become shorter. Appearances become calculated. Not because something has been proven, but because something might. And that might is powerful. It explains why loud defenses haven't flooded timelines. It explains why responses feel measured instead of aggressive. Silence doesn't confirm wrongdoing, but it does confirm awareness of stakes. And awareness is enough to keep audiences locked in. Now the definition of ruined becomes important. If ruined means legally convicted, that hasn't happened. If ruined means permanently shadowed by suspicion, that process may already be unfolding. Because once perception shifts, it rarely resets fully. Even if cleared later, even if nothing surfaces, the question remains archived online. Searchable, replayable, persistent, and in the digital age, persistence equals impact. So the situation isn't explosive because of one revealed clip. It's unstable because of unresolved possibility. And unresolved possibility keeps tension alive. That's where this stands. Not at resolution, not at confirmation, but in sustained pressure. And sustained pressure is where reputations either stabilize or crack. Pressure doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just sits there, quiet, visible, unresolved. And unresolved tension is heavier than scandal. Because scandal peaks and falls, uncertainty lingers. Right now, what makes this situation volatile isn't proof. It's duration. The longer ambiguity remains, the more imagination fills the gaps. And imagination is rarely generous. When audiences sense that powerful people may know more than they're saying, engagement spikes. Not because new facts appear, but because silence starts to feel intentional. And intentional silence feels strategic. That's where perception becomes dangerous. If someone denies loudly, they look defensive. If someone stays silent, they look cautious. If someone files legal action, they look threatened. Every option carries interpretation. There is no neutral move once narrative momentum builds. And momentum is already moving. Now think about how quickly public psychology shifts in high-profile cases. At first, people wait. They observe. They assume there must be context. But when multiple threads, lawsuits, federal action, industry tension, documentary hints start overlapping, patience disappears. The story stops being isolated. It starts feeling systemic. And when something feels systemic, people assume depth. Depth suggests hidden layers. Hidden layers suggest secrets. And secrets keep viewers locked in. This is how the loop sustains itself. No confirmation required. Just sustained ambiguity. Now here's a critical shift happening beneath the surface. The conversation is no longer about individual events. It's about networks, influence networks, protection networks, power networks. When audiences believe a network exists, they stop asking, "Did this one thing happen?" They start asking, "How long has this been happening?" That question multiplies suspicion instantly. And once suspicion multiplies, every associated name carries weight. Even if involvement was minimal. Even if interaction was surface level. Even if context was innocent. Because in the public mind, networks don't operate casually. They operate deliberately. That assumption raises stakes dramatically. Now consider how moral authority complicates this further. When a celebrity faces scandal, audiences expect complexity. When a religious leader faces proximity to scandal, audiences expect distance. Expectation creates pressure. Pressure creates scrutiny. Scrutiny magnifies everything. Tone, body language, word choice, even absence. If someone avoids addressing a trending controversy directly, viewers assume calculation. If someone addresses it too broadly, viewers assume evasion. The standard becomes impossible. And that impossibility is where reputational fatigue begins. Now layer in the documentary factor again. A documentary doesn't need explosive footage to shift perception. It only needs narrative confidence. If the tone suggests hidden depth, if the structure implies investigation, if the editing highlights contrast, the audience feels like they are being shown something significant even if no definitive revelation occurs. That feeling matters more than confirmation, because audiences respond emotionally before they process logically. and emotion spreads faster. Now here's another dynamic rarely discussed. In high-level environments, people often attend the same spaces for different reasons. Business, networking, philanthropy, visibility, social obligation. Attendance alone doesn't define intent. But when a space later becomes controversial, retroactive suspicion attaches to everyone who was present. That's unavoidable. And that's where proximity becomes heavy. Even if someone entered a room for legitimate reasons, the room's later reputation changes the interpretation of their presence. That reinterpretation is powerful because it doesn't rely on new facts. It relies on reframing old ones. Now imagine the internal conversations happening behind the scenes. Advisors calculating exposure. Legal teams reviewing language. Public relations teams monitoring sentiment. Not necessarily because of guilt, but because of volatility. Volatility spreads, and no public figure wants to be positioned at the edge of something unpredictable. This is why the atmosphere feels tense. Not explosive. Tense. Explosions are fast. Tension is slow, and slow pressure changes behavior more subtly. Now ask yourself this carefully. If nothing more surfaces, if no confirmed footage appears, if no formal charges expand, does the shadow disappear? Or does it remain as a permanent footnote? That's the long-term risk. In the digital era, stories don't vanish. They archive. They resurface. They get referenced in future narratives. And even cleared associations leave digital residue. That residue becomes context in every future controversy. Which means even if this moment passes quietly, it may never fully detach. That's what makes this more than temporary drama. It's reputational positioning. And positioning influences legacy. Now zoom out again. What we're witnessing isn't a conclusion. It's a stress test. A test of how strong public image is when placed next to unresolved controversy. A test of how audiences interpret silence in an era that expects instant transparency. A test of how much proximity alone can alter perception. And the most important factor hasn't changed. Uncertainty. As long as uncertainty remains, attention remains. As long as attention remains, scrutiny remains. And as long as scrutiny remains, pressure remains. The story doesn't need a dramatic reveal to stay alive. It only needs unanswered questions. And right now, there are still enough unanswered questions to keep the spotlight steady. Not blinding, but persistent. And persistence over time is what reshapes reputations quietly. Without a single dramatic moment. Without a single explosive reveal. Just sustained, unresolved pressure. And sustained pressure changes more than headlines. It changes posture. It changes tone. It changes how people enter rooms. Because when a name becomes linked even loosely to controversy, every future move carries invisible weight. Not confirmed weight. Perceived weight. And perception doesn't require proof to be heavy. Now here's the reality most viewers don't consider. In moments like this, the truth moves slower than opinion. Legal processes take time. Investigations unfold quietly. Documents surface gradually. But public judgment forms instantly. And once judgment forms, it seeks reinforcement. People start rewatching old clips, reanalyzing past speeches, reinterpreting previous associations. They look for signs that match the narrative they've already accepted. That's confirmation bias in motion. And it doesn't wait for verification. It waits for validation. Now ask yourself something honestly. If this documentary had never been mentioned, if no hint of footage had ever circulated, would this conversation feel as intense? Probably not, because escalation amplifies suspicion. And suspicion thrives on the possibility of something bigger still hidden. That possibility is what keeps this alive. Not a released clip. Not a confirmed charge. Possibility. And possibility is elastic. It stretches. It bends. It adapts to whatever new detail appears next. That's why the situation feels unstable rather than explosive. Explosions are loud and quick. Instability is quiet and ongoing. It's the difference between a headline and a shadow. Headlines fade. Shadows linger. Now consider the long-term impact of lingering doubt. When someone operates in spaces of influence, whether spiritual, political, or cultural, credibility is currency. Not attention, credibility. And credibility is sensitive to association. Even if no wrongdoing is proven. Even if no footage ever confirms anything. The question mark becomes part of the biography. And biographies in the digital age don't reset. They accumulate. So whether anyone has been ruined depends entirely on what happens next. If hard evidence surfaces, the narrative shifts decisively. If nothing substantial appears, the intensity may cool, but the memory remains. If legal clarity arrives, it reshapes the framing. But until one of those events occurs, the situation remains suspended. And suspension is powerful, because it keeps the spotlight from turning off. It keeps audiences checking for updates. It keeps conversations active. Now look at how carefully words have been chosen publicly. No dramatic outbursts. No reckless accusations. No definitive confirmations. That restraint tells you something. Not necessarily about guilt, but about awareness. Awareness that every sentence will be dissected. Awareness that every response shapes interpretation. And interpretation right now is the battlefield. This isn't just about what happened. It's about how what happened is perceived. Because perception shapes legacy long before legal conclusions do. And legacy, once influenced, is difficult to repair. Now zoom out one final time. This story sits at the intersection of entertainment power, spiritual authority, legal pressure, and digital amplification. That combination is rare. And when rare combinations collide, they don't resolve quietly. They echo. They leave questions behind. And questions are the most durable element of any controversy. So the defining factor moving forward won't be speculation. It will be clarity. Clarity either reinforces suspicion or dissolves it. But until clarity arrives, the shadow remains. Not confirmed, not proven, but present. And presence is enough to test credibility, enough to test loyalty, enough to test public trust. Because in the end, this isn't only about whether someone was exposed. It's about how fragile reputation becomes when placed beside unresolved doubt. And whether doubt fades with time, or becomes part of the permanent record. Now I want your honest take. Do you believe proximity alone can permanently reshape public perception? Or should only confirmed evidence determine how we judge influential figures? Share your perspective below. And if you value controlled, deeper analysis over surface-level noise, subscribe and stay connected. Because these stories don't end with one headline. They evolve,